You're watching Physical Activity Researcher podcast. Interviews with world-leading physical activity researchers. Yeah, I think that was a really good uh, description of sleep and different stages. And I think we could talk about sleep probably several hours, but let's move a little bit forward. So how do we measure sleep?
So sleep measurement has evolved over the last 100 years or so. It really wasn't until about 60, 70 years ago that we started to really put electrodes on people's brains and start to measure EEG activity and eye movements and utilize that technique. For long standing periods of time, we've relied upon just patient report, individual report. It's focused a lot on the subjective experience, anecdotes about dreams, and how that's mapped onto the subconscious. Um, you go back hundreds of years, and that's the predominant mechanism for kind of assessing sleep, if you will. The more objective tools kind of came online in the um, kind of 1950s or so when technology afforded the opportunity. And um, I know this is near and dear to Ollie's work as well. We relied heavily on accelerometry to capture sleep and wake movements. Clinical actigraphs served as the predominant tool for objectively measuring sleep. And these can generally run up to $1,000 or so. And they're basically just wrist worn devices that have a triaxial accelerometer that measures movement in three different directions and uses the um, physical activity from that to determine whether someone is awake or asleep. And truthfully, there's a lot of inherent limitations to that approach, as we've seen. It can lead to a lot of estimations, generally overestimations of total sleep time and sleep efficiency. So, no measurement is going to be without error, though, as we also rely upon a gold standard technique known as polysomnography. And polysomnography, poly meaning many, somno, sleep, graphy measurements, basically is as it describes. We put a lot of different wires on you to measure a various physiological signals, whether it be brain activity, EKG, your heart activity, EOG to measure your eyes. We measure muscle tonus in the legs. We measure respiration using belts, all these different wires and sensors in a laboratory setting to comprehensively uh, classify sleep. Because accelerometry has the inherent limitation that it cannot classify sleep. It can quantify sleep, but it cannot classify sleep beyond just sleep and wake. So its tool is more or less about kind of establishing a sleep wake pattern, getting a sense into your sleep wake cycle, and kind of the duration of your sleep per se. But it doesn't tell us anything about those stages of sleep that we were talking about earlier. And so polysomnography provides us that in-depth look, but it's cumbersome. You have to go to a specialized location. It requires um, trained clinical staff to interpret it, to provide feedback, and you generally have to budget a night of your life too, and you're in an artificial environment. So we're not necessarily capturing true habitual sleep, and we're definitely not measuring over a longitudinal period, which limits the utility of polysomnography, which is the gold standard measurement. So you think to yourself, okay, so the gold standard measurement has limitations. Well, we're screwed. Thankfully, there's been kind of an advent of technology that's allowed us to take these gold standard tools and bring them closer to the habitual environment. So there's things like ambulatory PSG, at home PSGs, where people can come to your home and measure you in your home environment. Still requires specialized training, things like that. It's a bit cumbersome, and you're not going to get the longitudinal data you want to see the variability or the consistency or inconsistency in your sleep wake patterns. I'm really excited about where the commercial domain has come in to kind of fill this gap. And I first started to do this research in kind of around 2014, 2015, with the rise of commercially available fitness activity trackers that were starting to purport the ability to capture sleep. And at that time, Ollie, the truth is that they were pretty much mirroring the accelerometry approach that was utilized by clinical actigraphs, but their estimations were much worse at that time in these early stage models. And that probably is a byproduct of just the algorithms they were using at that time. Over the years, devices have evolved from a hardware perspective and a software perspective. The algorithms are getting better. We're using machine learning approaches to better make use of the data. But the biggest change was, I think, through the inclusion of heart rate detection. And I often struggle with this word, but photoplethysmography, we'll call it PPG. And that really expanded the potential and utility of these devices, where no longer were they just dichotomizing sleep similar to a clinical actigraph and were widely overestimating sleep duration and sleep efficiency. But now they were purporting the ability to classify sleep into light, deep, and REM. And truthfully, they sucked at first. They really did. Their accuracy relative to the gold standard polysomnography was generally about 30 to 40% for classifying sleep in these early stage models. But the good news is the commercial domain moves very quickly. And there's been a lot of progression over the last 5 years where these devices are really solid now. Their sleep duration estimation abilities are pretty much comparable with polysomnography. And feel very comfortable with their ability to estimate sleep duration. And their classification abilities, despite major growth, still have a little bit of error, but it's markedly improved. So for any of these real modern devices that have an accelerometer and a PPG heart rate detection, I feel pretty confident that they're probably accurately classifying sleep about 50 to 75% of the time. And there's going to be variations based on the product and how much attention the company spent to kind of optimizing their algorithm and things like that. So to kind of close the door, right now we rely on kind of multimodal approaches to measure sleep. We still think the subjective experience is really important. So questionnaires and sleep diaries, those are really useful as they're convenient and they can be utilized in epidemiological large studies, but they're very prone to bias, especially retrospective recall. And so that's where the objective tools come into play. Polysomnography is the gold standard. And if you have any concern for like sleep disordered breathing or a parasomnia or a true organic sleep disorder outside of insomnia, you're probably going to want to have an in-laboratory polysomnographic evaluation. But there are other tools that allow us to comprehensively measure sleep now in the natural environment. And I think that domain is just going to rapidly expand. And I want to temper my enthusiasm, but I'm truly excited about the frontier of this and the kind of advent of not just wearable technology, but now nearable technology where sensors not directly on you, but around you can measure your environment and potentially accurately quantify and classify sleep without potentially disrupting your sleep, because some people are really sensitive to wearing equipment. So I think it's right now amalgamation, a combination of subjective and objective tools. And the biggest barrier right now, Ollie, is how these commercial tools can integrate with the clinical domain. It's a gray area right now. And I think that's the challenge for the field, is finding the best use for this, and also for the commercial domain to kind of play on our turf, if you will, at times to showcase algorithms and be a little more transparent that allows us to better integrate these clinically.
Yeah, really, really good description of different methods. I have many questions. I don't even know where to start. Maybe I start with the PPG sensor and the heart rate measurement. Why does the heart rate provides so much better accuracy for the sleep detection? How does it work, and what do you look from the signal?
Great question. And I will uh, first point out that not my area of expertise as far as the actual detection of the signal. And I would steer you to Marco Altini or Max Desembody for very comprehensive deep dive into that. I can give you kind of the overview of it. But PPG, the kind of theory behind how this is going to help is not so much on the actual identification of a start or an end of a sleep period, but it allows us better ability to predict when we're moving through different stages because our heart rate changes during stages of sleep. As we go into the deeper stages of non-REM 2 and non-REM 3, our heart rate starts to slow down. Um, and similarly, we also reach kind of our lowest core body temperature in the middle of our sleep as well. So we can utilize these physiological signals as proxies into the changes of sleep without actually directly measuring the EEG or the brain activity going on. And then you see a spike often in more irregularity in your heartbeat during REM, rapid eye movement sleep, because it's known as paradoxical sleep. Why? Because it looks a lot like wake when I put you under all these sensors. Your brain activity speeds up, gets a bit more erratic, your heart rate starts to increase and also become more variable, things like that. So it's the kind of intersection of known changes in heart rate that allows us to then classify the kind of navigation of sleep architecture, the different stages across the night. The accelerometry part is still relied upon heavily to determine kind of the onset and offset of sleep, but it's the PPG that gave us some insight into better ability to predict the different stages of sleep. And then from there, it's been refinement in the algorithm where you get big data sets of polysomnography that also have wearable devices, and people who have much more sophisticated statistical backgrounds than myself can use machine learning or AI techniques to kind of improve our prediction abilities. And that's where these devices have really improved over the last couple of years.
Mm. Yeah, I see. And you mentioned the temperature. How is the temperature between core and for example wrist? Could we get some information with the temperature sensor about the sleep stages if the device is worn on the wrist?
Yeah, I would think so. You know, we're not using that really yet. And I think, as you pointed out, there's complexity there of like how much alignment or how accurate is the wrist temperature measurement relative to internal core body temperature. But as these devices have expanded with that modality, and then also the ability to detect kind of oxygen variations throughout the night with kind of SpO2 monitors, I feel like these are going to be incorporated more. But more or less, I guess this is a good time to kind of talk about this. The body's always seeking homeostasis, right? That's kind of a fundamental view here, and one of the reasons why a hot cup of tea or a decaf tea or a warm shower prior to bed helps with sleep initiation and sleep quality is that it leads to a homeostatic rebound where the body then starts to try to cool itself. So you've warmed the body, now you're cooling it. And that's critical because as we reach our deeper stages and kind of the middle, what's known as the nadir of our sleep, that's our lowest core body temperature of a 24-hour period. And so you're basically starting the process. You're sending a signal to the body to start cooling itself, which in turn starts to kind of mobilize sleep biology. So I think that's the kind of theory behind whether or not we could utilize temperature to help enhance kind of algorithmic development. But I don't think as a standalone temperature would be sufficient, whereas heart rate itself has been shown to be sufficient to kind of reliably and accurately predict sleep stages. So I think the kind of enhancement or the future here is the combination of all these signals in a similar fashion to what we do with polysomnography to give our best guess of what is this sleep stage. And I do think that the devices, the wrist worn detection, will, if it's not at its current stage, I haven't looked at the literature, but if it isn't there yet, it will in the future be able to accurately be a proxy to internal core body temperature.
Mm. I think I have read somewhere that in general you sleep better in the cooler room, but still it's better sleep if you have socks and I think gloves because it was complicated how the body temperature is in different parts. Do you know anything about this? Could you tell us a little bit? Because it makes a difference if we measure the temperature from the body or from the wrist, I guess.
Yeah, well said. And I must say that's not something I'm well versed on, but I can just speak anecdotally, and whether it's with people I've worked with while training clients, things like that, or myself, um, I think we're going to see a lot of variability in those recommendations too, right? Like I was definitely a staunch like I sleep better with socks on, and now I've realized I sleep better with socks on in the winter, but I'm really prone to overheating. And so actually if I wear socks at night right now, I'm more likely to have more awakenings and have less quality sleep for me. But my
Mm,
partner, she needs to sleep with like 8 pairs of socks on just because she runs like a little bit colder than I do and things like that. So I think there's going to be a lot of variability there. And that also brings us into kind of the variability of measurement where different skin uh, textures and different kind of pigments will lead to different ability to detect the signals we want. And so I think that is a key point here is are the signals, is the accuracy of the signal consistent wherever measured? And truthfully, my best guess is probably no, right? And so
mm.
where is the best location to measure temperature for the purpose of sleep is kind of the focal question there.
Mm. Yeah, and why I'm interested because some of the accelerometer sensor chips have actually integrated temperature sensor. It's not probably ideal location as it's usually not directly against the skin with most of the designs, but I think that's something interesting. And then usually we measure the accelerometer is on the wrist. Is there a clear reason why is it so, or is it more convenience? Could it be elsewhere, and do we get the same quality of sleep quantity from different parts of the body?
Great question. I think largely it's a convenience angle, right? It's not as invasive, if you will, just having a wrist worn device. At least for me, um, generally speaking, if I had a strap around my chest or if I had something on my leg, I'd probably be more. I notice it more than just having kind of a wrist worn watch because it mirrors something I wear every day, anyways. So the translation from my daytime wearing a watch to nighttime wearing a watch is not as drastic as putting some other unique or distinct object in my body. Yet there are a lot of actigraphy based devices that can be worn elsewhere, whether it's a chest worn strap or often in pediatric research with kids, they'll often use leg accelerometers instead. Um, and I do think there's merit in certain disordered populations, whether it be persons experiencing Parkinson's disease or things like that, where they may have resting tremors, that it may be more useful to measure from a different location. And I don't think we do a great job at this point kind of tailoring our measurement approach to those types of characteristics. But I think that's what we should be looking at in the future is gathering data from a different location for this person going to lead to better quality data and thus better quality recommendations and insight. So yeah, we can do actigraphy at various points, at different points in the body, right? We're just basically measuring movement. And I think the wrist makes the most sense for now just because of a convenience standpoint and people being most comfortable with it and less likely to disrupt their sleep.
Mm. Yeah, and how do you see most of the algorithms are done for the wrist? Do you think the same algorithms could work for different parts of the body, for example, ankle, or do you think the sensitivity needs to be changed because kind of size or mass of the part that is being moved?
Yeah, fantastic question. I do think that you would have to have uh, different algorithmic settings depending on the location of the body. Um, just because of the way I'm most familiar with the Respironics ActaWatch, and I've done a lot of work looking at their optimal setting configuration for reducing bias, um, for kind of assessing sleep duration in disorders of hypersomnolence, which we can talk about later. But what we found was there was wide variation in kind of the subtle tinkerings of the settings. And that's strictly just measuring in one location, right? And truly, we're relying upon movement in general. So the signal kind of magnitude itself is going to be majorly different from like a physical activity count perspective, if you will, if measuring on leg versus wrist. I just see differences there. So I personally think that location is going to matter, and you're going to probably have to develop a specific algorithm for that. And then things we just ignore is that individual characteristics matter, and some people move more than others, and that's within their sleep state, right? Whether they have a true disorder like a parasomnia or somnambulism where people are sleepwalking, doesn't have to be that drastic, to create wide differences in the estimation ability of these devices. So I've wished, I suppose is the right word, for many years now to have more of a personalized algorithmic um, kind of development within these devices, kind of a training period to the individual that perhaps maps onto a night in a sleep laboratory if we had the ability to do that, but rather maps onto the subjective experience. And the algorithm can be trained on to one's perception of sleep. Simple questions like, do you feel like you moved more than normal last night, or was that fully representative of your sleep? And then the training can then occur there, so that person gets a personalized estimation of sleep rather than some universal standardized algorithm that may give them, for one individual, a completely problematic bias.
Mm. Yeah, I think this is very interesting. Like I come from the lot from the sedentary behavior and physical activity research, and now there's a recommendation mostly to measure from the thigh because then we can detect the sitting and standing difference. So and the health effects of sedentary behavior. But basically, you do 24-hour measurements or 7-day measurements, and then the device will be on the thigh. So we actually get a lot of raw acceleration data, but that's all from the thigh. How would you use that data the best way for to study sleep also? We cannot change it to the wrist every night. So how would you go with the thigh data?
Um, I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with using data collected there. I just think the process then needs to be, from a validity standpoint, showing that the algorithm developed there, the raw signal you're collecting, um, can be reliably transformed into sleep or wake characteristics that, within reasonable error, map onto those derived from polysomnography. So I would do studies that have the thigh device on, and with polysomnography, and then utilize statistical techniques such as machine learning to utilize the features collected from the thigh device, and then able to predict with best accuracy the sleep stages you're in, and develop whatever function emerges from that, from the features being utilized, however they're weighted, whatever reduces the bias would be the best algorithm with that data. And I certainly think there's no harm to doing it. Again, it's just another um, location of collection, and it's just recognizing the differential limitations and strengths of that location of collection.
Mm. And do you know any studies that would have actually had just several accelerometers around the body and then using polysomnography to actually study? It's not a difficult setup, but have anyone done it well?
Yeah, nothing really comes to mind off the top of my head. I can dig deeper. There's definitely some open source data sets that um, are polysomnography within pediatrics. And they're largely looking at sleep disorder breathing, but they may have an accelerometer, kind of leg worn or thigh worn as well. And that may be a way to get kind of a training data set or a starting point to kind of build an algorithm. But I can look deeper to see if there's studies that have compared actigraphic estimations based on location, because I imagine there's some good studies out there that I'm just not aware of.
Mm, yeah. And how do you see one more question about the locations? How do you see backworn? We have one application where in clinical case, there was a need to be able to differentiate between sitting, laying down, and then standing, walking. And that's easy to do from the signal when you are wearing the accelerometer on the back. How would you see the sleep detection in this case? Is it similar again with the body? You are kind of central. Probably you use your arms and legs more than you are actually turning your body. How do you see it going?
Yeah, that's what I think. What I really like about some of the stuff you're doing too is the ability to kind of predict the positional sides of things more, and those more nuanced movements rather than just like acceleration, trying to translate these signals into actual meaningful um, characterizations, if you will. Um, I do think that when in terms of sleep, we're really limited on that front, regardless of how we approach it. Without having like a chest sensor, I think that would be our best way to kind of determine the positional layout of someone, whether they're on their side, on their back, or supine is really important. So on their back, if they're having sleep disordered breathing, whereas the wrist and the legs, I don't think give us as much information. And truthfully, that's kind of an inherent limitation as well here is their ability to strictly from accelerometry tease apart sleep and motionless wake, right? That's the big limitation right now is I can lay there perfectly still and be cognitively awake, but these accelerometers may pick that up as sleeping. So that's just kind of the inherent limitation of relying upon accelerometry alone. um, but I think there's ways that we're going to supersede that in the future. As far as kind of capturing the best positional state, I think trying to do that from the chest makes the most sense. Um, but I could see how like a head worn accelerometer may do better at that than say a chest worn. But I think right now that is a better modality of collection or location of collection than say a wrist or a leg.
Mm. And how do you see the sleep position if you can measure it? Does it have a lot of clinical relevance? Is it meaningful to measure the sleep positions?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I think for the most salient or glaring reason is for sleep disordered breathing. Obstructive sleep apnea is the most common form of sleep disordered breathing, and it's highly prevalent across society and increasing in prevalence too, largely to sedentary behaviors, the rise of obesity, unhealthy eating habits, things like that. And we're more prone to having sleep disordered breathing when we're on our back. And basically, it's actually kind of a simple mechanism, if I can describe it kind of elementary. So a main cause for obstructive sleep apnea is a crowded airway, and we have a flap, a physiological flap called the uvula, that kind of parses through or regulates kind of airflow. And when you're on your back, that uvula has a harder time staying open, largely because of gravity. Gravity is a pain, right? And so gravity is pushing that down. And kind of when we lay on our side, we're less likely to, or our airways more likely to have more open space. And so when someone goes into lab for an assessment, they'll actually break up sleep disordered breathing events, things like respiratory related arousals or apneas or hypopneas, which are just shorter or less intense stoppages of breathing during sleep, into whether it occurs on one's back or on their side. Because someone may have really, really bad sleep disordered breathing when they're on their back, but it may not be that bad on the side. And so the question becomes, do they need an invasive technique like a continuous positive airway pressure machine, a CPAP machine? Or what if we do positional therapy and we put a little tennis ball on their back in kind of one of those like cyclist jerseys they wear. And so that whenever they lay on their back, they're kind of prompted to roll on their side. And perhaps that in alone is sufficient enough to manage or treat their sleep disorder breathing that's causing poor sleep quality. I've always had a hypothesis that there's more to this, though, Ollie, that when it comes to like physical injury or the propensity for kind of spinal abnormalities, kind of rolled, hunched backs, things like that, we spend a third of our life sleeping, right? So it makes sense to me that the physical formation of our sleep matters for kind of long-term physical structure and stability. But we really haven't done that research. We haven't parsed through that and understood that like curling up in the fetal position may not be an optimal strategy for kind of spine or back health. And that's something that I've always thought we should explore further. And I think that's where kind of positional sleeping positions should be looked at in the future and would be an interesting area of inquiry.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's interesting. And also from the thigh worn, you can detect basically sideways and on the back sleeping. It gets a little bit more complicated if you kind of flex from the hip. So then it's get a little bit more messy, but I think generally you could detect those also, and definitely if the sensor is on the body, you can do that. You mentioned nearables, which is probably maybe new word for some people. Could you first tell what they are and what is the status at the moment, how valid they are for detection of sleep and different stages of sleep.
Yeah, certainly. So we're gonna just globally talk about two categories here. As wearables, we'll crudely classify as anything that's worn, anything that's wrist worn or thigh worn or put on your head like an EEG headband. Anything like that gets lumped in the category wearables, where it's making contact with you to pick up a signal that it's then translating into sleep characteristics. Nearables are relatively new compared to wearables. Their advent's probably within the last 5 years or so, and these are a lot of bedside monitors, or even you could put pads under mattresses, things like that, that are trying to detect the same signals as wearables and translate them into sleep and wake characteristics, but are doing it hopefully without contact. And that's an exciting thing for me, as some people are really sensitive to touch during sleep or kind of slight disturbances. You can imagine someone who has kind of a heightened arousal state because of post traumatic stress disorder or something like that may not want to have contact with things during sleep. That may disrupt sleep. And that's not the purpose of these devices, right? It's to provide a lens into our sleep. So, nearables is just a catch all term for anything that's not touching you, but is purporting the ability to quantify or classify sleep. And they first had major utility. Um, I think their most salient, immediate utility came in kind of as a screener for sleep disordered breathing. Snore microphones is a great example that were available on cell phones early on. And so potentially it could capture snoring that could shed insight into whether somebody has severity of sleep disordered breathing that warrants clinical attention. And I still think that's their most polished utility at this point. But the rapid growth of the commercial domain has, again, enhanced this area greatly too over the last couple of years. And I don't think they've fully reached the point of um, wearables yet from their sleep detection abilities, but they're definitely improving, and they're purporting similar outputs. And I think these are kind of the future in some ways of what a sleeping environment looks like, where you have a nearable device that's monitoring your sleep in real time and can actually adjust the settings in your home, like a smart home, to either make it cooler, warmer, to start turning on lights, to start turning off lights, to mimic the natural world. I think that's the future, where a nearable is going to be kind of plugged into your home environment to help not only enhance your sleep quality, but also bring you out of sleep and kind of transition to wakefulness a little bit better too. But right now, I think the technology is not there. They often use radar techniques to peripherally probe the environment. And I just think it's a little bit less accurate in their detection abilities than, say, a wearable at this point.
Hmm. And what do you see as the most potential nearable? Is it the microphone or is it the bed sensor, which is actually detecting actual movements? What do you think will perform the best in some years?
Well, right now, I think it's the bed sensors from an accelerometry perspective, or that's what my lit review for a book chapter I just wrote kind of led me to believe, right? I think the accelerometry, the ability to detect movement is pretty consistent across wearables and nearables at this point. And in fact, a bed sensor may be better in some ways of detecting meaningful movement, that which is of a magnitude that would suggest transitions between sleep and wake and things like that. The snore mics do have good um, evidence, substantiation that they can capture the signal we want, right? And that can be translated into a meaningful characterization of breathing metrics. The question becomes which application, which device, so on and so forth, because they're not all consistent across applications or devices. And that's the major challenge for the field right now, is we're incapable of evaluating. I will always hesitate to use the word validating, because I don't even know what validating really means when something is fully validated. But we cannot evaluate everything that comes on the market. And so there are some things that have been gone under more empirical rigor than others. And I think that those devices that have gone through that process generally suggest that the snore mics and the accelerometry detection are pretty quality. I
Mm,
think the future becomes, can we use techniques? There's, if I can't remember the exact year, but I think in 2017, 2018, it was first coming online as far as radar to detect EEG activity in the brain. And can we uh, collect that critically important signal through a nearable would be fantastic, right? Right now, we still have these EEG headbands. I think that'll quickly be um, superseded by Bluetooth applied electrodes that can connect to a wearable. But it'd be great if we didn't have to wear anything. And if a nearable could use some sort of radar technology to kind of capture what is going on at a physiological level, especially in the brain. And I do think that's the future. It's just whether technology is going to let us get there. It's not really, I guess, an if, it's more of a when, I think, when technology lets us get there.
mm. So EEG headband probably not nice to wear in the night. Do you see it? How does it integrate? I'm thinking like people have piercings in their ears, maybe in their nose. Could it be a piercing that is working as an EEG electrode?
Yeah, that would be interesting, right? Like an embedded kind of electrode, an aesthetic, right? We're in the fashion
Mm,
realm now of EEG electrodes. Yeah, I certainly see something similar to that. I mean, on the crude level, it's truthfully, Ollie, it's a surprise to me it hasn't happened yet that a
mm,
big commercial company has not created just a little patch, like a little Bluetooth patch that you could apply to a frontal location just to get
mm,
some EEG signal, because we've seen in the literature that you can reliably stage sleep off of just a single channel. So why
mm,
not try and bring that critically important piece of information as a feature into your algorithm build? And for me, where I see this as the major benefit is the ability to detect not just classify the stages better, but the real ability to detect the difference between motionless wake and sleep, and to
mm,
improve our ability to determine sleep onset and offset. So how long it's going to take someone to fall asleep is going to be affected by that measurement error right now, and also wake during the night. And because those characteristics are insomnia related symptoms, and insomnia is the most common disorder among the general population, it makes a lot of sense that we should focus efforts to better capture those characteristics of sleep from an everyday use perspective, but certainly from a clinical perspective.
mm. And how is it with the bed sensor? Because I think in clinical use you can measure cardiac output from a table. So basically your heart beats, there's a mass of blood rushing toward your head, and according to Newton's third law, your body is moving with the same amount backwards. So can you do you think that could be detected also with the bed sensor with some sensitivity?
Yeah, I think the technology is getting there for sure, and I think it's going to be it probably will require hardware changes more than software changes to kind of amplify the signal, because I imagine it's probably a very low frequency or just a hard to detect signal from a bed
Mm,
sensor perspective. So I think that's where the biggest change is going to be, is this balance between we don't want this giant, big, cumbersome thing, but we need a strong ability. We need something that can amplify and detect the signal, or make it a little stronger for us to utilize, right?
mm,
And so I think that's the limitation there, but it probably will be resolved soon enough. I'm really interested in seeing. There's a researcher, Dr. Andy Galpin, who's really interested in sports and performance recovery, things like that. And he's found himself in the sleep space as well now. And he's created a product that I'm not entirely too familiar with. I recently heard about it, called Absolute Rest. And it basically utilizes a nearable device to capture respiration, CO2 levels out of the mouth as well. And they're using all of these types of information to better characterize sleep. So
mm,
I think a lot of people much smarter than myself are doing. Sounds like you as well are doing remarkable things to kind of push the um, sensitivity of sleep measurement devices forward, and also expand the resources that are available to improve our collection abilities and better adapt them on a personalized level.
mm. Yeah, this is very interesting. But maybe we move on after one question. What's your prediction of future of sleep wearables, nearables, hearables? I don't know what all there will be. What do you think it will be in 5, 10 years?
Yeah, I think the frontier is really, really exciting. Um, Truthfully, I don't think that we're looking at 20 years away. I don't even think we're looking at 10 years away. I think within the next 5 years, we're going to have these environments. We can call them bedrooms if you want, but our sleeping environments that without effort or intention on our end, passively collect all the information without having anything connected to us that can comprehensively describe sleep and quantify sleep at a level that is comparable to polysomnography. And reaching that point would be a major success. If we can just longitudinally track sleep health at that level with truly all passive forms of collection, that'd be amazing. We've explored sleep pajamas. We've explored a lot of those types of things, and I just think those are more disruptors than enhancers at this point. So the future is really about a single device that maybe makes use of other kind of modalities that exist around it to capture the signals that we capture in laboratory while doing it from the comfort of your home. And then again, to modify the environment as that happens. So if Ollie's going to sleep and the device notices that Ollie is a little bit more aroused than perhaps he normally is at this stage, what can be modified in the bedroom environment, whether it be that Ollie's TV's on or Ollie's listening to a podcast and the volume of that podcast starts to gradually go down as the device tries to help Ollie find a sleep-like state, right? Or drift into sleep. And similarly, Ollie informs the device that he would like to wake up no later than, say, 7 o'clock in the morning. And the device can then, even in the colder winter climates, potentially modify the room so that the lights in the room start to gradually increase to mirror that which we would have in the natural world, that then informs our circadian rhythm, starts to downregulate the melatonin that we need to not be kind of sleepy upon awakening, upregulate cortisol, and have more of a natural progression out of our sleep rather than this, in my eyes, archaic use of alarm clocks to disrupt our sleep and yank us out of sleep. So I think it's this combination of improved measurement passively that leads to comprehensive measurement similar to that of polysomnography. I won't stand here and say that we're going to be as precise as in-lab measurement within the next 5 years, but allows us to take that comprehensive measurement to the natural environment. And that in turn can integrate with this movement towards kind of smarter homes, if you will. And that can lead to modifications in the environment, whether it's lowering the temperature in the room to help Ollie reach a deeper stage of sleep, or gradually bringing on light in the morning to help Ollie come out of sleep. That will be the real change and evolution of these devices and our ability to measure and modify sleep in the natural environment.
Yeah, perfect. So a lot of technology to make me sleep better. How you thought? Thank you for that. Yeah, we have discussed now about an hour, and we haven't covered at all the sleep problems and your research expertise of hypersomnias and future research plans. So maybe we wrap up this here, and we have a short break, and then we continue. So thank you, Jesse, for this.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Ollie.